Good evening. I'm really delighted to welcome you to the presentation of our Spring 2023 Fellows. I'm Daniel Benjamin. I'm the president of the American Academy in Berlin. So all of our presentations of the Fellows are remarkable. How could they be otherwise? But this one is particularly great since it is the American Academy's 50th class of Fellows, quite a hallmark, quite a landmark. Now, 50 is a big number and a widely celebrated anniversary. And the origins for this particular resonance, as all of you Old Testament scholars know, is that every 50th year the ancient Israelites celebrated something called a Yovel, the original word for our Jubilee. All slaves were released, debts were forgiven, and land that had been sold was returned to its original owners. The Jubilee was announced by the blowing of loud trumpets throughout the land. As the president of the American Academy, it's very useful to occasionally wave around some arcana so that I feel that I'm entitled to dine with our much more learned fellows. I'm afraid we have no loud trumpets, and I can't forgive your debts, much as I'd like to, but I am pleased to say that we have as our speaker tonight Dr. Tobias Lindner, State Minister in the Federal Foreign Office. And I want to thank Dr. Lindner very much for taking the time to join us. To our trustees in the audience, Regina Leibinger, Hans-Michael Giesen, Volker Schlondorf, and Senior Counselor Ambassador Bernhard von der Planitz, I want to thank you for your work over many years to make the Academy the vibrant institution it is. We are deeply grateful for your commitment. And our guests of honor this evening, I'd like to welcome the 9 outstanding scholars, 3 writers, and singular composer of the Spring 2023 class of Fellows, as well as their partners and families. We couldn't be more thrilled to have you here with us at the American Academy in Berlin. In full disclosure, 2 of our fellows are not physically here, but you will hear from them nonetheless. This class of fellows is working on exceedingly timely topics from the history of Russia, or perhaps I should say different Russias, over the centuries, to Germany's identity in its many forms, to global pandemic response, climate change, and migration. And I am certain that once you hear their presentations this evening, you will agree when I say that our Jubilee class is one of our most impressive ever at the Academy and a testament to the Academy's renown. Now, to turn to our speaker, or let me preface this by saying, as I turn to our speaker, I think everyone recognizes that the past year has united the Western Alliance in a shared response to a war that, as of this month, has been underway for 1 year. Russia's aggression in Ukraine, as well as the tensions between China and the West, and we'll make no further mention of the menacing balloon that has traversed the U.S., has powerfully revived the sense of solidarity after years of drift and at times tension. Yet at a moment when we are more closely bound together and joined in common effort, the need to talk to one another and to understand one another never recedes. In truth, it is as important now as ever. And for a demonstration of that, one need only consider the news of the last few weeks. Americans have expressed puzzlement, to say the least, over German reluctance to send Leopard tanks to Ukraine, forgetting the historical burden that so profoundly informs contemporary German attitudes on war and peace. Germans express their deep concern and indeed sometimes a sense of being insulted by America's Inflation Reduction Act, which breaks with America's historic anti-protectionist policies in order to address some of the economic woes that underlie America's political turmoil. So it is quite clear that even close friends need to talk to each other and need to do so often and in depth. And that is a big part of the reason the American Academy is here in Berlin. I feel confident that State Minister Lindner, who works closely with Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, agrees with that statement, and I look forward to his remarks about Germany's role in our fast-changing politics. Tobias Lindner has had a distinguished career in public life as a member of the Bundestag for Bündnis 90 Die Grünen since 2011 and as spokesperson on security affairs for the Greens since 2018. In 2021, Foreign Minister Baerbock appointed him Minister of State in the Federal Foreign Office. Dr. Lindner, we are really pleased you are here tonight. The podium is yours.
Good evening. It's such a pleasure to be here and to see this audience. Dear Ambassador Benjamin, dear fellows of the Academy here in Berlin, ladies and gentlemen, it is a particular honor to welcome this group, the American Academy Spring 2023 Fellows in Berlin, and it marks, you already mentioned it, the 50th class of fellows of this Academy. This means that the Academy has brought 500 distinguished individuals from the US to Germany, creating valuable connections and deepening our bilateral relationship. And I would like to warmly thank you, Ambassador Benjamin, and the whole team of the American Academy in Berlin for your dedication and commitment. In addition, you mentioned the year 1994. This year also marks the Academy's 25th anniversary, underlying its relevance and adaptability over time. It shows that the dedication of the Academy's founders, including, of course, the Arnold Kellen families, and the commitment of numerous private donors and supporters on both sides of the Atlantic. Just recently, the Academy announced a new fellowship in Jewish studies to begin next year, and other programs such as a fellowship in American public economy. Many more will hopefully follow. At the same time, these 25 years show the American Academy's appeal to the scholars applying to come here as fellows. In this time, the Academy has hosted numerous leading experts from a range of disciplines with projects of the highest scholarly merit, thereby enriching the transatlantic dialogue in the arts, humanities, and public policy. The fellowships represent our core belief that there is an interdependency between all of these areas of studies, between our political and our personal lives, between freedom and democracy, between the freedom of learning and the capability to defend freedom. All of which is crucial in a time when our way of living, and you mentioned the Russian war of aggression, when our way of living is threatened by authoritarian ideas and actors around the world. And now you, the 50th class of fellows, have arrived at the American Academy in Berlin. So please let me wish you a warm welcome. We are proud to have you here. Some of you might have lived in Berlin before. Some of you have already spent some time in Germany. And for some of you, it might be your first long time stay in Germany. But all of you, I believe, are aware how challenging times are for Europe and Germany today. It appears to me, especially here in Europe, we have been in a crisis mode for over 10 years. I remember when I became Member of Parliament in 2011, it started with a sovereign debt crisis, with the euro crisis, with Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine in 2014 that led to the illegal annexation of Crimea, the refugee crisis triggered by the war in Syria, Brexit, and the pandemic. And ladies and gentlemen, this list is by no means complete. And then almost 1 year ago, Russia started its war of aggression against Ukraine. It has sent shockwaves through our systems. What we have been facing since then is honestly more than a crisis. We have reached a historic turning point, indeed, a word that has brought it to many languages, a Zeitenwende. Certainties were overturned, foreign policy paradigms shifted at unprecedented speed, and a great deal of insecurity entered the scene for everyone, for the government, for the business community, and for the private citizen. And we must not underestimate the impact of this on our societies. However, despite all these uncertainties, together as allies and transatlantic friends, we have made clear that we will not accept Russia's revisionist and imperialist attack on the European and global security architecture, and that we stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. We stand with the Ukrainians who are fighting every day for their right to live self-determined lives and for their right to be free. And ladies and gentlemen, I am convinced that together we will live up to this challenge. Our cooperation and coordination, be it in NATO, be it in the European Union, or be it in G7, is based on trust, shared values, and lessons from our history. This is a hard combination to beat. We as Germans and Europeans know how important and essential the United States and our transatlantic friendship are, especially in these times. In Germany, the federal government has made clear that any return to a business as usual is out of the question. Russia today is the most immediate and serious threat to European security. For as long as Russia continues on its current course of war and aggression, nationalism and revisionism, it cannot be a partner. Unfortunately, security in Europe, and let me be clear, security in Europe today means not security with Russia. It means security from Russia. This also means that we have to develop a new, more strategic view on the world as it is, not as we imagine or as we wish it has to be. And we have to live up to the expectations of our partners have regarding our and the European Union's capacity to act decisively. This will require sustained engagement. And we have to explain to our fellow citizens why we are taking certain decisions which come with a price tag most of us could have not imagined just 1 year ago. It is essential for the general public to understand the world, and many potential aggressors are assessing our reaction. This is a process we, politicians and diplomats, cannot run alone. It is a complex interaction with the public sphere, where scholars, artists and public intellectuals, as you fellows of the American Academy in Berlin, play a crucial role. If we fail to address Russia's fundamental challenge to the international rules-based order, we will have to pay a heavier price down the road. This has implications for foreign security as well as for economic policy, and we have to be fully honest about what is at stake with the public. And therefore, further investment in the transatlantic partnership is crucial. We must reinforce our strong interpersonal and intercultural bonds across the Atlantic, including through programs such as your own. It is important that both sides know that they can count on this partnership, regardless of any current crisis or election outcome. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock underlined in her speech at the New School in New York last year that for 18 or 25-year-old German, President Kennedy's Ich bin ein Berliner or President Reagan's Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall are merely events in history books. This shows clearly that we need to invest into the younger generation and develop narratives and visions that inspire our youth. The USA and Germany are changing, also demographically. So we Germans need to widen the scope of our contacts beyond the east and the west coast of the United States that every European enjoys, especially for vacation. We need to get in touch with the young, with the heartland, and speak to all of the American society. And vice versa, it should be attractive for all Americans to participate in exchange of fellowship programs like the ones of the American Academy. So, dear fellows, let me conclude with 3 more personal considerations. When I first arrived in the city of Berlin as a young parliamentarian, I was struck by all of its complex history visible in so many parts of the city. From the Prussian palaces to memorials linked to the atrocities of the Nazi regime, the remnants of the Berlin Wall and the traces of the Allied forces. Here history is omnipresent. For me, especially the Reichstag building is such a building where the highs and the lows of German history of the last 150 years are strikingly visible. So if you have never been there, go there, and if you're there, give me a call. If I'm present, I will give you a tour. The building represents Germany's unification in the 19th century. You see traces of the fire of 1933, and you can read the graffiti written by the Russian soldiers in 1945. For a policymaker, this is a permanent reminder of the consequences of her actions. Second, as a politician coming from the south of Germany, let me state that Germany is not Berlin. What is true for so many countries, and I believe also for the United States, and I've been to, I think, 35 states in my life, and not only to DC. What's true for so many countries is particularly true in a federal and historically multi-centered country like Germany. So if you allow me some local patriotism, I would suggest a trip to my home district, the South Palatinate, the Südpfalz, in the southeastern corner of my home state of Rhineland-Palatinate. You will not only find me, but you will find a rich economic, cultural, and academic landscape. You will find excellent wines. You are close to the French border, and you usually enjoy, honestly, a much better weather than here in Berlin. But that's just one only slightly biased example. While Germany may look small on a map compared to the United States, it is a country with many different regions and cultures. And while you will soon probably discover that the saying in German is pünktlich wie die Deutsche Bahn, or in English as punctual as the German railway cooperation, is clearly outdated, we have a strong rail and public transportation network that will bring you to any destination in Germany. You don't know how long it will take, but it will bring you to any destination in Germany, I can assure you, so try it. Last but not least, let me thank you for coming to Germany and to build and deepen your networks, both with Germans, but also with the vibrant international community that you will especially find here in the city. I'm sure you will find interesting partners to exchange within academia, in the government, in think tanks, or in NGOs. There is a big transatlantic community here in town, starting for sure with the American Academy, but also including the German Marshall Fund, Aspen, Atlantic Brücke, and so many more. And you might also want to think of getting in touch with the fellows of Villa Aurora or the Thomas Mann House in Los Angeles, where our fellows reside. Ambassador Benjamin, ladies and gentlemen, I want to close by again recognizing the important role this academy plays in shaping transatlantic exchange of excellence, thereby making a difference in the public space with its transatlantic linkages. Dear fellows, welcome to Germany, welcome to Berlin, and welcome to the American Academy in Berlin. I'm convinced you will have an excellent stay, meeting exciting people, and realize projects of great transatlantic relevance. All the best for you. Thanks for your attention.
Minister Lindner, thank you for your wonderful remarks, which were politically right on the point, and which may have either created a requirement to buy a lot more wines from the Pfalz, or a Bahnkarte for all of our fellows to go on the weekend. One of the requirements of a fellow here is that they actually be here most of the time, but I fear we may have to make a carve-out for a trip to Rhineland-Pfalz. Anyway, I'm now pleased to present to you our fellows. As I mentioned, 10 of them are present. 2 will appear via video. They really are coming. They'll be here this weekend, the other 2. Then you will be treated to 3 groups of brief presentations, elevator pitches of true erudition, if you will, punctuated by the short films we've created with them, so that you may have a clear idea of what we are all about here at the Academy and the breadth and the depth of the subjects that our fellows follow. In order of appearance, the fellows will fall into, as I mentioned, three groups. First, the foreign policy scholars, historians, political scientists, anthropologists. Second, the fellows working on various aspects of German studies and exploring questions of identity, and we're including our composer in that group. And then finally, our fiction writers in the third group. After that, we'll have a video message from our biofellows in public health that will discuss their two distinct projects. So with that, I turn it over to the fellows.
I think international relations has gotten increasingly relevant over the last several decades.
Well, I think we're at a really interesting juncture point in the evolution of Slavic and Eurasian studies, which I think is the larger sort of conceptualization. I mean, the breakup of the Soviet Union raised questions about which territories of the Soviet Union should even be included in our field.
We, as European historians, are called upon to make our field relevant again. And, it strikes me as kind of strange that we would have to do this, given that in the current international situation, European countries are our closest partners.
The entire Earth system is now being impacted by human habit, by human behavior. And so anthropologists have really seized this moment of discussing the Anthropocene to reevaluate and reinflect our discipline with the big questions of what it means to live in the world as a human, how it means to live in the world in certain environments.
One of the things I've been struck by is just the extraordinary amount of writing that's occurred about, I would say, the war first and foremost. The extent to which that's actually making its way into sort of State Department thinking is a little bit less clear to me. I mean, I think in some sense, clearly it is.
Currently, there are more and more anthropologists who are moving into consideration of environment, climate change, energy transition.
Political scientists have, I think, in the last, maybe 10 or 15 years, really made an effort to promote themselves as voices that should be listened to in policy.
Well, there could be a greater connect between what we do and what happens in public policy. I'm a bit critical in this regard. I think sometimes historians overstretch the boundaries of what they actually know and can talk about when they delve into issues of public policy. That happens pretty frequently. So, wer bin ich? So I'm John Conley. I'm the John P. Birkeland Fellow in Humanities. I also teach history at the University of California, Berkeley, and I will try not to overstretch any boundaries in what I say. My project is about how Germany became Germany. So why is this a question? Isn't Germany just another European nation? The trend of the last 50 years in my profession, history, has been to say precisely that Germany was an ordinary state that advanced to democracy and civil rights through the 19th century, just like France or Britain, until something called World War I got in the way. And after that, the Versailles Treaty, delivering Germany to Nazism. My hunch is that, in fact, Germany was very different and had been very different for a long time. So consider two dates. The first, 1980. That winter, I worked for the U.S. Army not far from here in Dahlem. Dahlemer Weg, actually. But at that time, there was no Germany. And in fact, West Berlin, including the place we are right now, did not even belong to a German state. Only in October 1990 did Germany emerge as the last major European nation state by far. So I think that signals a very unusual story and indeed a very old one. So my second date involves the year 1200. So if you look at maps of Europe from 1200, you'll find proto-states like England, Denmark, France, Poland, Croatia, Hungary, Muscovy. What about Germany? At the map's center was something called the Holy Roman Empire. If you read the fine print, you'll notice of the German nation. But it was not Germany. It included parts of Italy and France, Luxembourg, today's Slovenia, parts of Croatia, and all of today's Czech Republic. Then in 1806, the empire in German, Das Reich, disappeared. Why did it disappear? Well, it was weak. It had no government, it had no capital, it had no army. Part of the reason for that is because the early emperors were more interested in real estate in Italy than they were in asserting control here in Germany, which is something we can understand from the weather of the last 2 weeks. In any case, Germany became so disunited that when Napoleon Bonaparte asked the emperor impolitely to disband in 1806, it did, by imperial decree, hardly any noticed by anybody. August of 1806, a very hot day, there was a proclamation from Vienna. When Johann Wolfgang Goethe heard the news, he said a quarrel between his coachmen that day in August of 1806 had been more interesting than that news. But within a few years, Germans became obsessed about making Germany reappear. So here's the problem for Europe and the world. Germany was supposed to be at least the huge old Reich, perhaps more. And you've heard that Germany, in fact, did emerge as a kind of Reich, a Kaiserreich, as a state, a nation state in 1871. What you haven't heard is that this state was a failure from the very beginning because 1 in 3 Germans were left out. And so when an Austrian politician who was handed power 2 generations later said he was going to remake the Reich, the Third Reich, his program in those terms made sense to a lot of Germans, even people who later gave their lives resisting Hitler. For example, in July 1944, believed that Germany as Germany must include not just Austria, but the Czech lands, parts of Poland, France, Slovenia, Belgium, Luxembourg. In short, the old historic Reich. So why is this project tracing efforts to make a German Reich over many generations? That's what I intend to study. Why is it worth doing? Frank-Walter Steinmeier said a few years ago that after World War II, Germany had effected a unique break with civilization. Very strong words. My intuition is that this break with civilization had something to do with Germany's unusual history after 1806, of trying to become a nation state and an empire, a Reich, at the very same time, in the very same enormous space, basically, between France and Russia. Germany was to become what Hannah Arendt called a European continental empire. Until 1945, Germans took for granted that their country had to be a Reich. Even the Weimar Republic, I think that stamp collectors will know this, but the rest of you may not. The Weimar Republic actually called itself Deutsches Reich, an empire. The basic implication was that everybody in the Reich's gargantuan space had the fate of becoming German, German in the sense of the word Volk, a word long considered to be synonymous with race. So the Third Reich was not a necessary endpoint of German history. As I said, Hitler was handed power in 1933. But in the terms in which Germans understood the basic shape of their nation, from deep in the past, going back hundreds of years, that Reich made sense to far, that is, the Reich that he intended made sense to far more than the 37% of the population that voted for Hitler in 1932. Anyway, that's my intuition, but I still have lots of work to do and a fabulous place and fabulous company in which to do it. Thanks for your attention.
Hello, my name is Abraham Newman, and I am the Richard C. Holbrook Fellow this year. I'm a professor at Georgetown University in the Government Department and in the School of Foreign Service. And I wanted to do my introduction in 2 parts. First, just to tell you who I am, how did I get here, and then what is this project that I'll be doing that hopefully you'll come and learn more about while I'm here. So I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. I knew nothing about Germany. Germany was a very foreign place. It wouldn't be on the top 10 of the places I was thinking about when I was growing up. And I went to Stanford University, and it was they call it the farm. And in some ways, it's a beautiful place, just like this place. When I walked in here, I was overwhelmed by the kind of the splendor. And when I was there at Stanford, I took this course just kind of randomly. It was called Germany Through the Eyes of the Artist. And it was a political science course, and it was looking at Germans politics by reading novels and going to art exhibits. And I was struck. I was struck by the tensions, by the different conflicts that were happening in the literature and the art. And I started taking German. And I was lucky enough to go my junior year abroad to Berlin, where it maybe was, I think the non-lucky part was I arrived in January. And the first few weeks, I wasn't sure people smiled. I really was like a little worried that wasn't going to happen. But luckily enough, I persevered and I got a Fulbright, going back to the importance of exchange between the two continents. And I wanted to go to Berlin because I wanted all the cool clubs and the parties and whatever, but they sent me to Bonn. And, it was sleepy, but I forged friendships that I have to this day. I lived there for 3 years. I went back during my PhD, and I went to Cologne, to the Max Planck Institute in Cologne. And for all those people that are ready for Carnival, get ready, because it's coming. Not here, unfortunately, but if you were lucky enough to go to the Rhineland. And that really cemented my empathy, my interest, and just a deep curiosity about Europe and Germany. So where does that leave me in my research? So I think most of us, whether we like it or not, whether we admit it or not, there's a caricature, a very simple story that we carry around with us in the back of our head about what globalization means, how it works. And that story is about how it's really complex. Probably the best known version of this is Thomas Friedman wrote this book, The World is Flat. And a lot of people say, oh, it's a terrible book, or I don't believe that book. I never believe it. Whatever you want to say, there's like a little kernel of this idea, which was that globalization decentralized power. And that meant that states, governments were neutered, that they were like at the hands, the whims of big companies, and big companies were going to rule the world, and war was going to become obsolete because of this version of globalization. And my research really confronts this caricature. And it says, that's not the way the world works. And what we're experiencing right now is a product of our failure to recognize that. And so what does my argument say? It basically makes two main claims. The first is that the globalization is actually very centralized. If you look in your pocket, you have a phone that is dependent on one of two companies. It's either Google or Apple. Those are the companies that are making your phone work. If you try to make a financial transaction that's more than $10,000, it's gonna go through the SWIFT system, which is a centralized information system for banks. If you experience the pandemic, you experience supply chains that broke down because only a few companies made toilet paper. Maybe it was the car you wanted to buy. Maybe it was about some new product that you were looking for, maybe a vaccine. And so the reality is the world is not flat. It's concentrated. And the companies want it that way. Why? Because they make a lot of money from that. They want the rents of being monopolists or pseudo-monopolists. And what my research looks at is how states, particularly the United States, but increasingly China, have used that structure, that concentrated structure, to get at their enemies, to say, you know what? If we don't like you, you will not have access to that Apple iPhone. You will not have access to that SWIFT system. You will not have access to those vaccines. And that concentration of the structure of globalization creates a new type of conflict in the world, which my research with my co-author Henry Farrell, we call weaponized interdependence. What am I doing here this year? What I'm doing here this year is to look at how is Europe dealing with this new reality. And my intuition is to say it's a very uncomfortable place for Europe right now. And why is that? Is because that story I told you about globalization is like a story that Europe told itself writ small for the last 50 years. It was a story about how would Europe recover from the end of World War II. It would do it through openness, through economic exchange, through the idea that markets produced wealth and that wealth produced peace. And what I think Europe is facing is that the four freedoms from the Rome Treaty, that they're increasingly shackles that are, creating conflict, not just peace. And so how does Europe then deal with that? And that's going to be the center of what I'm looking at over these next few months. And I'm really excited to engage with you to have the support of the Academy to just get a better understanding of what's going on.
Great. Greetings, everyone. It's lovely to see you all here, and thank you for coming out this night. I know it's often a long way out to Wannsee. My name is Simone Howe. I am a professor of anthropology at Rice University in my usual life, and this semester I'm lucky to be the Axel Springer Fellow at the American Academy during the spring of 2023. When I was coming through the gates here at the Hans Arnold Center this January, I started to think of all the times that I've spent in Berlin. And there have been many, many months. I've had many, many trips here. I couldn't even count them all. I was trying to kind of do the math. But they're uncountable. Sadly, my German is also non-existent. For that, I am ashamed. But I was also thinking about my first trip to Berlin, which was in the summer of 1990. And I was able to get one of the last visas for Checkpoint Charlie, back when that was a thing. And so I have a passport somewhere stuck in a drawer somewhere in California that has that visa stamp in it that maybe one day I will pull up. So as I said, I'm an anthropologist, and I've been working on issues of climate change for over a decade now. I've done a lot of work on renewable energy transition, and now I'm specifically focused on adaptation to climate change. And so the work I'll be doing here has to do with climate change and the way that human communities and social systems come together around these really dramatic environmental changes that we're seeing in our world. Arguably one of the most daunting challenges we face collectively as a human community. So the project that I'll be working on this semester is really about melting ice in the cryosphere in the Arctic region and rising seas in cities all over the world. In this project, what I do is I follow the water from the melt in Arctic regions like Iceland and Greenland, and I'm able to see where that water that is melted into the world ocean then becomes sea level rise in global coastal cities. So the way I do this is with a tool, a climate tool that's been developed by physicists at NASA. It's called a gradient fingerprint map. It's a very complicated modeling tool, but essentially what it allows us to see as a heuristic device is precisely where locations of melt are becoming sea level rise in particular coastal cities all around the world. So my field sites are Iceland and Greenland, and also Honolulu and Cape Town, South Africa. And if you come to my presentation on February 28th, I will explain that significance to those places. So what I'm interested in proposing in this research, actually, and I'm glad that Abe brought up globalization because it's an important issue for me as well, is that actually in times of climate change, we are seeing new global connectivities between distant and disparate places that are brought about through climate change. And so what I will argue is that we're beginning to see something that I call hydrological globalization, and that is the connectivity of water that is brought about by anthropogenic climate change. So as we know, theories of globalization ever since the end of the Cold War primarily have been focused on issues of migration, about the movement of finance around the world, about the movement of media, about the movement of ideologies, and sometimes about the challenges of war and conflict. So what I'm interested in honing in on here is the physical connectivities that are made through a melting world that is also a world of rising seas, and the kind of strange, novel, but important connections that are made between us as we face climate change as a collective. So I hope to see some of you, many of you, at the conversation, and so that we can talk more about how to collectively respond to these challenges that we all face. Thank you.
Well, there's a lot of people here. So my name is Paul Worth, and I am a professor of history at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas. And here I happen to be the Gerhard Casper Fellow. And Minister Lindner, I want to thank you for your comments, and what I have to say really relates, I think, quite directly to some of the things that you were talking about. What is it that I want to say? Well, I suppose I would begin by noting that my colleagues, they tell about their plans in ordinary prose, and surely they deserve a hand, and yet everybody knows that if one wants to look distinct, it's not enough to be succinct. You have to sing or dance or joke. The risk is there, I will allow, but nonetheless, I'll say it now. You have to entertain the folk. I know it might seem perverse, but I'll present my plans in verse. So Russia is my topic. Thank you. To be clear, its size and scope. The place was far from microscopic, which explains my central trope. Empire is my mode of thought, and by this term we really ought to have in mind diverse regimes. Muscovy, the realm of czars, the Romanovs, then commissars, the Bolsheviks with radical schemes. And no, there ain't no substitutin'. We must include Vladimir Putin. So 7 centuries, I say, that's my block of time, and within that frame I shall array, but no, I won't use rhyme. Moscow's growth from early days, the methods, modes, and various ways that Russia got, more land, more space, more subjects did it thus acquire. I don't demand that you admire that country, but it is the case. The question now before my eye, where was Russia, when, and why? Territory, that's the thing that interests me right now. And sovereignty can also bring more insights.
Ja, genau.
Ja, genau. Borders, a related theme, can tell us where all countries seem to end and thus where others start. So tariffs, maps, and border posts and marks beyond the country's coasts, all of this it does impart.
A territoriality to Russian space.
Says John Connolly. The Slavic principalities, 'tis they who start my tale, and varied nationalities enhance its depth and scale. Finland, Ukraine, Polish lands across Eurasia to the sands of Samarkand, the Caspian Sea, the Baltic lands in Sakhalin, Alaska, Georgia, all are in. And yet it was not exclusively that Russia grew, I'm here to tell. It lost a lot of land as well. Crises, conflict, civil war reduced the country's size. Retrenchment was sometimes a sore. So lows and not just highs appear in Russian history. All readers of my book will see. One curiosity I'll add for Germany and for Yankees too. They were among the peoples who, back in the past, at one time had a border with the Russian state. To be her neighbor was their fate. There, I'm done. We've had enough of borders, Russia, kindred stuff. Ask me if you want some more. I try hard not to be a bore.
I think Black German Studies is having a sort of resurgence, quite frankly, in terms of all of the really amazing new literature that's being published and produced by Black German authors. So there's lots of new scholars, at least on the other side of the Atlantic, working on Black German literature.
The cultural studies paradigm shift and an emphasis of interdisciplinarity, I was able in the US to, in my dissertation, work on literature and music together, something that I wouldn't have been able to do here in Germanistic. So that is really relevant for me. And now the interdisciplinarity of my project goes even further to look at a variety of genres also that I'm not trained in, that I'm reading as a cultural studies scholar. Within Turkish German studies also, while the early phase focused on the post-war and later on the post-unification period, with an emphasis on the German cultural archive, scholars and colleagues have started to look toward the Turkish archive and also expand the temporal framework.
We see that Germanness has always been conceived of in an interesting exclusionary way that has been contingent on the exclusion of a variety of minoritized communities, like Jews, like Turkish Germans, like Afro-Germans, like Asian Germans, for example. And so I think this is a way of really making German studies a bit more attentive to these contours of what Germanness constitutes, as well as what Germanness is, quite frankly. It's not just one thing. It's been many things across centuries.
My name is Tiffany Florville, and I'm the Anna Marie Kellen Fellow here at the American Academy. In the U.S., I am an associate professor of European Women's and Gender History at the University of New Mexico. Breaking Bad territory. But I'm beyond honored to be here. I begin with a short anecdote about my first trip to Germany to visit my German pen pal in 1997. I visited her family for about a month, but on one occasion we went to the local butcher to get some meats, of course. And while we're there, the butcher is sort of smiling at me as he's sort of sharpening his knives. And I sort of was like, terrified. But I also asked my pen pal's mom, like, what's going on here? Like, is he going to carve me? Like, how does this work? And she said, you're the first Black person he's ever seen. Little did I know that this would begin my interest in studying Black German experiences and Black experiences and cultures in Germany. So my first book, I basically looked at Black German mobilization and the Black German movement in the 1980s and 90s. And I looked at their different modes of politics, intellectualism, and diasporic kinship. I also argued in the book that Black Germans really tried to push to the fore ideas about race, racism, and the afterlives of colonialism, while also trying to change some of the cultural and political dynamics that were happening in Germany. This also brings me to why I'm at the American Academy. It's during that research for my first book that I stumbled across Maya Eam, a Black German author, activist, and poet. And it's through my initial work with her in the first book that I'm drawn to her and deciding to write an intellectual biography about her. And mine was able to forge a variety of connections, racial kinships and solidarities with individuals across the globe, oftentimes in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and elsewhere. And it's through her connections with these different individuals that she's creating new ways of intimacy and going beyond these notions of descent, biology, characteristics that oftentimes define Germanness. So it's through this project that I'm hoping to uncover different ways and different modes of kinship, but also contours of how intimacy works. It's not just tethered to familial bonds per se, but she's also creating her own familial bonds with these new individuals who are not necessarily her kin, so to speak. And so it's through this that I'm hoping to open up new discussions about identity, belonging, kinships, and also politics. So I'm grateful to be here at the American Academy and to be in conversation with my lovely, lovely cohort. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, guten Abend. My name is Ella Gessen. I'm Associate Professor of German at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where I specialize in 20th and 21st century German literature and culture, with particular emphasis on literatures of migration, minority discourses, and transnationalism. This semester, I'm the Ellen Maria Gorrison Fellow here at the Academy, where I'm working on my second book, tentatively titled Cultures and Migration, Turkish Artistic Practices and Cultural Political Interventions in West Berlin. I'm examining cultural practices by Turkish academics, intellectuals, and artists in the early stages of Turkish migration, so 1970s, early 1980s, and I argue that these cultural practices are an early manifestation of Turkish self-representation, but also the formation of a Turkish public sphere in West Berlin. Central to this process, I argue, is the founding of various cultural institutions and their collaboration with one another, where the cultural sphere was conceived of as a space to actively participate in and shape cultural public political discourse, specifically centering on integration, which was understood as a bidirectional process that involved both Turkish and German residents of West Berlin, and also was focused on a knowledge of each population's culture, so familiarity with Turkish history, culture, and society, but also West Germany's. I'm also interested in understanding the degree to which these earlier practices have inflected contemporary cultural political interventions, especially in a post-migrant framework. While in Berlin, I'm very excited to revisit some archives, to attend plays and author readings, and also to learn with and from my fellow fellows and the wonderful staff here at the Academy. I should also say I'm excited to explore Wannsee, though my heart will always belong to Moabit, where I was born and raised.
Hello, my name is Tashi Wada. I arrived a little too late for the video in Berlin. I am the composer that was referred to, and I am the Deutsche Bank composer in residence for spring 2023. It's interesting hearing everybody speak because typically for musicians and composers, we end up in residencies where we're surrounded by artists. So this is, I knew it coming here, but it's an interesting context because it feels, on the one hand, sort of foreign, but it also feels very real, not being in my music bubble. When I was a child, my father, who is also a composer, Yoshi Wada, had a residency for a year through the DAAD residency program. And so he brought his family, my mother and me, and we lived here for a year at the Künstlerhaus Bethanien in what was West Berlin. And now I am here with my partner and our daughter, who is about the same age. So it's feels like a very nice circle in my life, and hopefully my daughter will come in a few decades with her family. While I'm here, I'll be working on a new long-form piece, which is titled "Hour of the Star." I'll be developing it with an ensemble of musicians here. Called the Harmonic Space Orchestra. It's a large mixed ensemble, and what's unique about the group is that their focus is issues of tuning and temperament in contemporary music, which is a somewhat specialized field, though it's grown in interest in recent years. And it's been essentially a through line for most of my work for the last 15 or so years. And many of the musicians I've known from different places they've lived, they've all gravitated here and never left. So I'm coming here now to work with them. And I think the quality of the musicians and their expertise definitely speaks to Berlin and what brings people here and the level of, I don't know, artistic achievements. And I will, the title of the composition, it's kind of an aside, but it comes from the last novel of the Brazilian writer Clarice Lispector, the last novel that was published in her lifetime. Clarice Lispector has been an important author for me in recent years and source of inspiration. I will be working with my partner, who is also a musician, who is here with me, not tonight, Julia Holter, who's a vocalist and songwriter. Yeah, through this collaboration, I'll be able to work more closely with her in writing for The Voice and developing a relationship between language and sound. And we will be presenting a concert in May of this piece, where we will also be recording it at Emmauskirche in Kreuzberg. That's May 20th. Hope you can be there. It'll be the premiere. It's a beautiful church. We went last week. And yeah, thank you, everyone.
I'm a great defender of MFA programs. They don't program writers. They just support them, and a lot of progress gets made by the students. I think that has contributed to the robustness of American fiction. I really do.
I personally believe it's very, very strong, and it's never been stronger, primarily because so many different voices are being heard right now, voices that in the past would not have been heard. And of course, there's room for improvement.
You know, as many in our times, I've become increasingly concerned about climate change and the relationship between territory and bodies. And in order to be able to explore this very complex situation, I think you have to question at least accepted literary genres.
I don't know if there should be any utilitarian purpose to novels or novelists. I think some of the things that we do is we describe the world around us, and we critique the world around us, and we try to subvert injustices.
Language is an energy that comes with tons of history in it. Language is a practice, is a tool, is an atmosphere in which entire communities participate.
As James Wood said, for serious noticing, to observe and to pay attention and to take what you see and mix it up and imagine it so that it has a particular focus and point when the reader comes to it.
I'm Lauren Groff. I am the Anna Maria Gorson Fellow in Fiction here. I'm unaffiliated, so all I do is sit in my bathtub and cry. I'm grateful to be here among you all, and I'm in Berlin for 3 purposes. The first is, of course, you have to fill the well to create anything. So I'm here to soak in the strangeness and the magic of this place, to get lost, which I do very easily, to be filled with ideas and joy. The second is to finish a story collection, if the stories come to me. And the third is to rewrite, for the 5th time now, the last installment of a triptych of novels about the Anthropocene, empire, organized religion, and the institutions that bind individuals, particularly women. It's a triptych, I say, not a trilogy. The subject, characters, epochs, and prose styles are wildly different from book to book. The first of the books was already published in the US and in Germany by Ullstein. It's called Matrix. It's about a 12th century nun drawing on the ideas of medieval mystics and the poems of Marie de France, who was the first female poet in the French language. The second is The Vaster Wilds, which will be out this fall in both the US and Germany. It's about the starving time, the winter of 1609 to 1610 in Jamestown, Virginia, which was the first permanent English settlement in the New World. And that book draws on Robinson Crusoe and early American captivity narratives by women in particular. And it plays with some very weird Elizabethan language. It was really fun to write. The third one, which I'm working on now, is called perhaps provisionally Doom Eager. And this is a title that I take a lot of joy in because I actually learned about it from an interview by my beloved Lori Moore, whom you will hear from next. But it's from an interview with the dancer Martha Graham. And Graham says in this interview, Graham says in her autobiography, Blood Memory, there is a wonderful Icelandic term, doom eager. You are doom eager for destiny no matter what it costs you. The ordeal of isolation, the ordeal of loneliness, the ordeal of doubt, the ordeal of vulnerability which it takes to compose in any medium is hard to face. The artist is doom eager but never chooses his fate. He is chosen and anointed and caught. Now, this is an especially apropos title for my book because there is, in fact, no Icelandic term as doom eager. It was so utterly changed by the time it got to Graham that she, in essence, coined her own word. The internet tells me that the closest equivalent is, forgive me if you speak Icelandic, þúsmyndið, or death excitement. But this book it's appropriate for the book because this book takes place over this long single night of insomnia with its radical metamorphosis of reality. Things in the book get distorted, even grotesque in the dark. My book includes, in this draft, God, the creation of art, climate apocalypse, the revelation of the Bible, black holes, childbirth, near-death experience, the Eidolon of Helen of Troy, house ghosts, and the ghosts of authors rising out of their books to speak. One of these authors is Gerard Manley Hopkins, whose sonnet Carrying Comfort gave rise to the idea for the book, particularly the last line of the sonnet, which goes, "That night, that year of now done darkness, this wretch lay wrestling with my God, my God." So I hope very much someday I will get to share Doom Eager with you. And thank you again.
Thank you all for coming. I am Lori Moore. And in my ordinary life, in my very ordinary life, I am the Gertrude Conaway Vanderbilt professor in English and creative writing at Vanderbilt University. And this semester, I'm the Gertrude Conaway Vanderbilt professor, and I am the Mary Ellen von der Heyden Fellow in Fiction here. Which it's a great pleasure and honor to be. Henry James said that one must write fiction that comes from one's life. Though it is sometimes hard to find James in his own work, he was discreet and creative, but he believed that life provided what he called the données of his four narratives, and especially for his, and what I might call the ingredients in the cupboard with which to cook up something new and different. One must give it all a shake and a swirl, a little simmer. The ingredients for my writing this term involve a trip my father took with his family when he was 10 years old. In 1935, my grandfather, the president of a small women's college in upstate New York, was invited by the Third Reich to come tour their new educational system. It's school for barbarians, as Erika Mann called it. And my grandfather eventually did become friends with Erika Mann. And all my grandfather had to do afterward was to return to the U.S. and go on the lecture circuit a bit, reporting on what he had seen. When he did indeed go back to the States, a little man with a clipboard sat in the front row of every talk, taking notes and never introducing himself. Why would my grandfather consent to be part or appear to be part of Nazi propaganda this way? Did he think he'd get a free vacation and adventure out of it? I'm sure he did. I'm sure this is the way a lot of frugal Scottish American academics might have looked at it. My grandfather loved German. He loved German music and he spoke the language, but surely this trip would have been something interesting for him because all expenses were paid. Would he be the Nazis' useful idiot, or would they be his? This unholy and ethically precarious bargain clearly is both a comedy and a tragedy. My father was the youngest child in his family, and once he arrived in Germany that summer, he was spellbound by much of what he saw, especially in Berlin. And the sights included, just once, Adolf Hitler striding through a hotel lobby. According to my father, such a glimpse was like seeing Elvis Presley, a big celebrity, even if you didn't care for his work. These are the ingredients for my narrative broth. And as with all books, we'll just see what happens. Thank you.
Buenas noches. I'm Cristina Rivera Garza. I am the Holtzbrinck Fellow this spring here at the American Academy in Berlin. I was born on the Mexican side of the U.S.-Mexico border and have lived for 30 years in the United States, which is the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world, as it turns out. Well, I believe writing to be a collective plural practice, the place of the we, which is at the same time the place of dissent and invention. My work usually weaves archival materials, odd artifacts, field research, spells, interviews, gossip too, and some deeply embodied imaginings. In the past, in a book titled Autobiography of Cotton, which I published a couple of years ago, it's only available in Spanish, by the way, I explored the experience, the migrant experience of my grandparents and the relationship with cotton as they carved a place of their own along the Rio Bravo. More recently, and here at the American Academy, I am following up that story, exploring the experience of my parents' generation with the production and demise of potatoes in the highlands, the central highlands of Mexico. Now, central to this story were a series of wild potato collection expeditions in which local and international scientists participated. One of the local scientists was my father. Some of the international scientists were German, and they were financed by German institutions and universities. And that's one of the reasons I'm here, of course. Other reasons include that I love Berlin, and Berlin is one of my favorite cities in the world, but I guess we can talk about that later, not necessarily here. And just as Lori was saying, my project has evolved tremendously over time. It has changed. It used to be a creative nonfiction project, and it has now become a speculative, creative, nonfiction project, including a plot line that is unfolding some 400 years from now. So we'll see what happens to that story too. But I'm quite confident that that very strange creature, many-limbed creature too, will find a way to grow here in this home. Thank you so much for the hospitality.
So I think you'll agree that we have an exciting semester ahead of us. I have to say that after hearing Paul Wirth's presentation, I'm tempted to make it a requirement that all of our fellows have second talents, you know, art historians who can juggle, political scientists who can yodel, things like that. I think it would add a lot to the Academy. Anyway, right now, I want to introduce our two Berlin Prize awardees of the Bayer Fellowship in Health and Biotech, Mary Wilson and Harvey Feinberg. They couldn't be with us this evening. They'll be arriving in Berlin this weekend, and we asked them to introduce themselves to you virtually with brief videos.
I'm Harvey Feinberg, president of the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. The Moore Foundation is a U.S. philanthropy whose main programs deal with basic science and environmental conservation. My professional background is in medicine and public policy. I spent most of my career at Harvard University as professor, dean of the Faculty of Public Health, and as university provost. Prior to taking up my current position, I served 2 6-year terms as president of the U.S. Institute of Medicine, now known as the National Academy of Medicine. I have long been interested in understanding and trying to improve public health, including national and global responses to pandemics. This began decades ago when I co-authored a report on the 1976 U.S. immunization program against swine influenza, a pandemic threat that never materialized and where the public health effort was widely regarded as a fiasco. In the aftermath of the 2009 H1N1 influenza pandemic, the World Health Organization invited me to chair a commission to assess the global response. Our prime conclusion, subsequently borne out by the SARS-CoV-2 experience, was that the world is ill-prepared to cope with a sustained major pandemic or any similar global health threat. One aspect that fascinates me is communication among experts, policymakers, and the public. In my lecture later this spring, I will explore the challenges and strategies to improve communication with the public on matters of public health. Another long-standing interest is decision-making, how we can make sound decisions. I'm interested in exploring the role of evidence. That is, how do we acquire evidence? What do we count as evidence? How do we interpret it? And how do we use it in our beliefs, our judgments, and in making decisions? How is this process the same, and how does it differ across different fields, such as law and justice, medicine and public health, science, public policy, international relations and security, business and finance, and in everyday life? I look forward to learning from all of you at the Academy and to joining you before too long.
Hi, I'm Mary Wilson. I study infectious diseases. I have long been fascinated by the question of why infectious diseases occur where they do, how and why they move, and how and why new infections appear in human populations or spread to new places. What factors determine where an infection will appear and flourish? What environmental, ecoclimatic, social, economic, and behavioral factors affect the presence of and burden from infections? What is the role of travel and trade in moving infections around the world as we become increasingly connected? I've been part of the Geosentinel surveillance network, now decades old, which collects data about infections in travelers as a way to capture where infections are being acquired and carried. A related area of interest, and one that will be a primary focus during my time at the Academy, is the appearance and spread of antimicrobial resistance in bacteria and other microbes. My work as an infectious diseases clinician for more than 20 years in the past made clear the ongoing and increasing problem of antimicrobial resistance in clinical medicine. But antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, is global and involves multiple sectors beyond clinical medicine, including agriculture, animal health, food systems, water and waste, the environment, and more. Understanding AMR requires a One Health approach, taking into account humans, animals, and the environment. Antibiotic use drives AMR. One approach to reduce the use of antibiotics is to reduce the need for them by preventing infections. One important tool is vaccination. During my time at the Academy, I will be exploring the role of vaccination in reducing antibiotic use across a wide spectrum of settings. I have spent my career in academic settings in Boston and San Francisco and have been actively engaged in global health, including helping to develop and teach a Harvard-Brazil collaborative course taught in Brazil, and traveling to Bangladesh more than a dozen times. I look forward to a productive and collaborative experience at the Academy.
Well, I want to thank all of our fellows for giving us these brief insights into their projects, which all appear to be fascinating. Minister Lindner, I want to thank you again for your excellent keynote. And to everyone else, I want to thank you for joining us. To those of us who have joined us virtually, I hope you have found this all intellectually nourishing and will lead you to want to join again, whether you're online or here. Please do look out for our spring program. I think they're out there in large numbers. And don't forget to check the website, americanacademy.de, to sign up for events, sign up for our newsletter, and to check for all updates. For those of you who are here, we now invite you to a reception. Thank you so much for coming, and good night.